the perfect American wife, the perfect mother, have a beautiful home, sort of have it all and deal with the enormous pressure of their husband going where no other man has ever gone.
While astronauts bravely catapulted into space in the 20th century, the women they left behind cheering them on were fascinating in so many ways. Best-selling author Lily Koppel reveals for the first time what these women experienced as they took their seat in this elite club, the Astronaut Wives Club. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Is there a comparison to be made to these women and maybe like football wives?
I was going to say, I saw a connection there, yes.
Yeah. Politicians' wives, I mean, it's kind of all.
Yeah.
Well, last night we were in Houston and doing a book launch, you know, pun intended, with all of the women. And so people were bantering around, you know, is this like the real Desperate Housewives of NASA? You know, Cape Canaveral. And I was like, well, see what they have to say about it.
Was it scandalous for these women? Did they have scandalous stories?
Yeah, but they weren't allowed to at the time. I mean, they all, you know, were complicated and had many dramas going on. Your husband is heading into space to the moon. But what was really hard for them, I think, was that NASA and Life magazine, which had bought the rights to their life stories. So these women were almost like America's first reality stars in terms of their private lives being covered. Oh, wow. Demanded, you know, that they be the perfect 1950s housewife, even into the 60s. And just like a scoop of vanilla ice cream. You know, one of NASA's first prerequisites was if you don't have a happy marriage, your husband's not going to have a space flight. So they felt really under a lot of pressure to keep everything looking perfect.
So they were silenced, right? They were voiceless during this time.
Well, they had a voice, but they had to, their motto became happy, proud, and thrilled. And this was something that they would hold up on the lawn with signs when the press was camped out there, because the feeling was, wow, if we told the press what they really want to know, which is how do you feel when your husband's sitting on a large bomb about to be ignited,
right.
Our husband would never have another space flight. You know, he might not go to the moon.
Or being told you had to act like you had a perfect, wonderful marriage, and you're holding the sign like happy, proud, and thrilled.
Pressure.
You guys can do it great.
Pressure.
We're like, nah.
That's why I asked for they silenced, because it sounds like, you know, obviously they could not really speak their minds, or tell what they were really struggling with like we do today.
Exactly.
Yes.
So that's why I think this was the right time for the story to be told, you know. But that era it's like Mad Men goes to the moon, and one of the women was separated from her husband before he became a spaceman, and he knew that if he didn't have a marriage that he wouldn't be picked. So she, being game, she was a pilot, she got back together basically for the sake of the space race.
But did she put on a big show, or was she actually happy to do that?
Well, they got divorced promptly after the space program, you know, after his time in the space program. But different women dealt with the pressure in different ways. I mean, some were complete optimists, like Marilyn Lovell, who a lot of your audience will know from Apollo 13. Her husband's played by Tom Hanks. She always believed that Jim would make it back, even during the hardest moments of that mission. You know, she just always said to her best friends, I can't live without Jim, and just sort of had this belief that he'd come back. But, you know, a good friend of hers, Susan Borman, the pressure was so much for her during Apollo 8 that she started drinking heavily. And it was, you know, she would have to hide that from the whole community until later.
So they were very open with you, sharing photos.
Yeah, these
and
women,
stories.
well, you know, I really won them over as a friend and as a woman. I knew how they had been inundated by the press back in the day, you know, just descended on them. And these were unknown military wives who suddenly their lives were turned inside out. And so, you know, I just told them that I was coming as a friend and someone who saw, you know, great value in their story and really felt that they had never gotten the credit they deserved.
How old are these women now?
They're in their 70s and 80s.
Oh, wow.
And they're willing to share. So
Yeah.
it's just interesting that they, I mean, obviously you befriended them, but they were willing to have their stories told publicly. So they've totally changed their perspective.
In a way, well, their friendship has really evolved over time. Back in the day, there were fears that they had to hold within themselves. It was almost like each woman was in her own orbit, even though they lived next door to each other in the space burbs, as they were called by NASA's operations in Houston. But in the early 90s, they got together for a reunion at Janet Armstrong's house. That's Neil's former wife. And they just started sharing, and it was like just a flood of memories and emotions came out. And so they'd been thinking about writing their story for a long time. But you know, in a group of women, it's like, well, which perspective are we going to tell it from?
You came into play.
That's where I knocked on their door.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to hear about how you discovered this story in the first place, and then maybe share some of their most interesting stories with us. Will you do that?
Absolutely.
Okay, we're back in a moment. You know,